ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः. Hari Om. So today's topic is a quest into consciousness based on Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivaha Brahma Yeva Na Aparaha from the perspective of physics. So assuming that most of the audience today are students of science, technology, and so I thought we can dive deep into what is Advaita, what is consciousness, and what is the actual meaning of this Vedana Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivaha Brahma Yeva Na Aparaha from the point of view of some basic physics. So I don't expect the audience to know too much of advanced physics, even basic level of physics, but that is the approach which we will take, and we'll try to understand this. So dictum Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Na Para. Many of us would have heard it, and it's a very, very commonly quoted dictum of the great Acharya, Shankaracharya. And if you look at where it comes in multiple places, and particularly both of the statements together in this format, it comes in two works of Shankaracharya, Brahma Jnana Valli Mala and Vedanta Dindima. And of course it comes like just the statement Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya alone comes in many Jagat Mithya alone comes in many other places also, including Viveka Chudamani Shloka 20 also has that. But then the full one comes mainly in these two places. This is where we can find it. Now every word in this is a technical word. So it needs a lot of conceptual build-up and a lot of vocabulary and logic to get to understand this. Can others be on mute? So to do this, so it will be a deep dive, and it is a very rational, logical build-up. So hold on. It would be a, I would say a great roller coaster ride. So one of the basic ideas of understanding Advaita, and especially the way the great Acharya Shankara, particular concept called Adhyasa. So we need to understand Adhyasa so that it is easy for us to grasp Advaita. Now his Shankaracharya's Brahma Sutra Bhashya's introduction itself is called Adhyasa Bhashya, which itself is a very, very great work of philosophy. So let us try to understand Adhyasa, and that will help us to understand this Advaitic dictum. So let us look at this dictum. So let us look at this grid of dots here. So when you look at it, you see a grid of dots. Now, many of you who have attended any analytical reasoning, that's a very common question is, count the number of squares in this grid. That is one of the problems. So if I ask any of you to count the number of squares, now first we may say, okay, fine, like it's a grid of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? 9 squares are there. And also if the bigger square is there, so 10. And then if you say like, no, there are more squares. Okay, here there is one, right? Like a square of these 9 dots together. So of these 9 dots together. So 11, 12, 13, 14. So and then why should the squares always be only aligned like this? If it can be 45 degrees tilted also, then you can start counting one square here, one here, right? So you can, the tilted squares are there. And then why should it be only 45 degrees? There is also squares just slightly tilted. So the squares, right, like the third one on the top row, and then the third one from top to bottom here, the third one here, and the third one here. So basically like, equivalent one in the other direction also. So 2 more squares can be counted here. So like this we can count the number of squares, and if you correctly count, you can count total of 20 squares in this grid, right? Now any of us can take it and look at it, and then we can visualize it, and then we can count 20 squares. Similarly, now if I ask you, like, tell me how many hexagons can you count in this grid? Easy peasy. You take this, so 1 hexagon here. Easy peasy. You take this, so 1 hexagon here. 2 hexagons, 2 standing hexagons, 2 sleeping hexagons, and then slanting hexagons, 4 of them, right? And then, like, so you can count you will be able to count 12 hexagons, right? So now why are we doing this? Now comes the interesting question. So we have been able to count squares and hexagons in this. Now the question is, are the squares and hexagons, put it in a philosophical way, what is the ontological status of the squares and hexagons that we counted just now? Now, we cannot call them as real, because before I asked you to count the squares and hexagons, you just saw just dots. You just saw a grid of dots. You never saw squares and hexagons. Now, when I asked you to count squares, you started seeing squares here. When I asked you to count hexagons, then you started seeing hexagons. Before I asked you to see hexagons, you never saw hexagons. You saw only squares. So the squares and hexagons are only in your mind. So then can we call them as imaginary? No. Why? Because we'll count the same number of squares and hexagons. 20 squares, 12 hexagons. Not one more, not one less. So which means you cannot say it is fully imaginary. Suppose without the grid, if I ask you imagine a few squares, then I might imagine 2, you might imagine 20, another person might imagine random. That is fully imaginary. Whereas once I give a grid and ask you to count the number of squares, you cannot call it fully imaginary. It has got a different status. Now that is what is called as mithya. So in Indian philosophy, status of things are broadly categorized into 3. Right? There is only broad categories. There are so many subcategories, and it's a pretty deep science. But for our discussion today, like, this is enough, right? So Satya is something which is real, right? Like the dots in this. Satya is something which is real, right? Like the dots in this square, right? In this context, that is real. Tuchya is pure, fully imaginary, right? Which has got absolutely no basis of reality at all. That is called tuchya. The examples given for tuchya called tuchya. The examples given for tuchya in the Shastras is Shashya Shringa, the horn of a rabbit, or Akasha Pushpa, the flower in the sky. Right? Like this, there are different examples given. So, which is the expression, there is no corresponding reality at all. Right? Now, that is purely imaginary, which is Tuchcha. Now, this case where your mind superimposes squares and hexagons on an existing reality grid is called superimposition, and that is called as mithya. And the most common popular example is Rajju Sharpa. So, in a twilight where the light is not very fully there, you see a rope fully there, you see a rope as a snake. You basically, in reality, there is only rope, but because of the context, because of the circumstances, you see a snake there, right? So a snake onto the rope which is there. Now, the status of the snake is mithya, right? This is mithya, superimposition. So now, there are still more vocabulary which will help us to understand. Indian philosophy calls uses a word called avyakta. Avyakta means unmanifested. So the patterns in the grid, we say, are in an unmanifested state. Okay. So that is a word used, technical term is, okay. So that is a word used, technical term is avyakta. And then the patterns are a superimposition by our mind on the grid. Right? So this is called as adhyasa. Now this is the basic concept which we need to understand. So I hope you have understood it clearly. Right? So now that we have understood what is adhyasa, now and also known the meaning of the word mithya, right, the superimposition, right, the status of the squares and hexagons, proceed further and build up on top of this. So next, Vedanta applies this concept, this logic, to our everyday experience. Now, what do we experience every day? We experience, etc. Right? So, if you see this presentation itself, you are able to see some black color, golden color, red color, right? And if you see in front of you, you see so many objects of different colors. Some things are green, some things are blue, different colors. Some things are green, some things are blue, some things are yellow, right? We see so many things. Now, we experience these colors. Now, the world of color that we see is because of the capability of our eyes, to see a particular range of electromagnetic spectrum. We all know that, right? We can see from violet to red and all the colors in between. The electromagnetic waves in between, all those frequencies we can see. The electromagnetic waves in between, all those frequencies we can see. We cannot see infrared, we cannot see ultraviolet. So those are outside our visual range. Now, so the world of the visual world that we experience, the limitation of our visual system. Now, for example, now if I take a green leaf, okay, from a tree, and if I take some, let us say, it is very, very cold, and I put it on the green leaf, when I look at it, I will say, oh, both are exactly green, and it is a camouflage. Like, we cannot distinguish the coconut chutney from the leaf, for the coriander chutney from the leaf. It is completely the same color. If a bird looks at it, birds can look into the infrared. Now, the bird will be able to easily say there is chutney and there is the leaf. Because of the temperature difference between the chutney and the leaf, the infrared signature is different. Leaf is different from the infrared by the chutney. And so the bird can very easily say that this is chutney and this is leaf. Whereas for us, both look as if they are the same color. Right? And so similarly, like there are people, the visual world that we see is because of the capability and limitations of the visual senses. Similarly, like we cannot listen into ultrasound. We can listen only from 2 hertz to 2 kilohertz, a very limited range of sound, and whatever is below the range of sound, and whatever is below that or whatever is above that, we cannot hear. There are this ultrasonic dog whistles, right? Dogs can listen to that whistle, but humans cannot hear. So now this is the case, and similarly the case. So the world of sound, and similarly the case. So the world of sound that we experience is also very, very limited. So same case with taste, right? Like the animals like dogs or pigs, they have like more than 200 times the capability of taste compared to 200 times the capability of taste compared to human beings. And there are even, the sense of smell is very different. Say for example, like if there is a room and like I come and I see the room, I see there are 4 sofas in the room. I see there are 4 sofas and father and mother sitting on 2 sofas, and there are 2 empty sofas. Now the same thing, when a cat comes in, it looks at the room, the same room, it sees the father, and then it can smell the pollen from the nearby park on the father. It knows that 5 minutes back the father had gone for a walk in the park. It sees the mother, but then it can smell milk on the mother, so it knows that 10 minutes back mother was boiling milk and making like tea or coffee or whatever. And it can there are 2 empty sofas, the second child on another sofa, so it knows that 5 minutes back the first child was sitting here and second child was sitting here, even though now they are not there. So the information got out of the same scenario by a cat is much more complicated, is much more compared to me as a human being, what is happening. So the world which we see is entirely different. Like sharks, for example, they can sense the electrical pulse in the nerves of living beings in the water a few hundred meters away. So it actually has a kind of an electrical radar on its skin, that its entire skin is can actually detect electrical pulses, and it can by the amount of pulses it can know what kind of animal is there 100 meters away and what size, and it can detect, it can do everything. For us it's a and what size, and it can detect, it can do everything. For us it's a different sense altogether, which is completely absent in us human beings. So what I'm trying to tell you is, the world that we experience, the entire human experience that we see, right, is capability and the senses and the limitations of our senses. And then of course we have the mind, right? The mind filters most of the sensory inputs which come in, right? Like as per neuroscience, like the amount of sensory input that is actually processed by the mind is given from the sense organs to the mind, right, to the brain. So the brain filters so much, and then it processes only whatever is limited, whatever is basic needed. And on top of that, we have got so many biases, right? If you read the book Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by the Nobel laureate, so much of biases are there in the human brain, right, that almost everything that we think we know or we think we decide, it is all like cooked up, right? And the mind does so much of extrapolations and interpolations. So like ultimately, if you look around and now you see the world around, and you the senses bring the information, and then your brain filters it out, your mind applies all kinds of biases and applies extrapolations, and ultimately what you think you extrapolations, and ultimately what you think you experience is very, very different from whatever world which is out there. And because our entire experience is only through our senses and mind, we don't have access to the entire universe that we experience is actually a superimposition by our senses and mind. And what exists out there, we don't have access, and that unmanifest substratum is called Brahman. Okay? So, real world which is there, to which we don't have any access, and on which our senses and mind have superimposed, and which we experience as the universe. Understood? So, looking at all these things, think about all these things. Looking at all these things, think about all these things. Look around and see. And everything that you see, everything that you experience, everything is actually like because of the limitations and capabilities of the senses and the mind. And this whole universe is as if created is a superimposition. And what exists outside of our senses and mind, we absolutely don't know, and we have absolutely no capability to know. Now, this is what is meant by Brahma Satyam, the substratum, the unmanifest substratum, on which this experience, this world which we experience, is a superimposition which we see, right? So just like how on the dots our mind superimposes and hexagons, so similarly on whatever this blessed substratum is, which we don't know, which we cannot know, on that the mind and the senses have superimposed this entire experience that we are having. Now, this is what is meant by Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. So every word is a technical word, so we need to understand. So the universe is not an illusion, right? Illusion, it's not illusion, it is not use the loose words. The correct word is adhyasa or superimposition, right? And superimposition cannot happen without a substratum. So which means there has to be a substratum which is real. That is what is called as Brahma Satyam. The substratum is real. And the experience, Jagat, is what is a superimposition. So this is what the first line means. Now, let us go to the next layer, right? We'll dig deeper into this nature of reality and to this nature of reality. And another word for it is Sat. Sat means the essence or the substratum, right? So, in physics, we have this theory of everything, right? We are in pursuit of that substance out of which the entire universe is made of, right? Suppose if you ask, point to something and then say, okay, what is this made of? So you'd say this is plastic. Okay, what is this plastic made of? Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, like, so all those are there, and it's basically like complex. Now, if you ask, okay, what are they made of? You would say like protons, neutrons, electrons, right? And then if you go still further, okay, what are they made of? Quarks, leptons, right? We have the theories. And if you go still further, like, so deeper and deeper, to get to a theory of everything, to arrive at one unified matter, and at that level, of course, matter and force don't have any distinction. So one unified force out of which the entire universe is created, that is what is the pursuit is. We have the different quarks and different leptons, and now the boson, Higgs boson is there, like, so basically we are kind of searching for what is that ultimate substance out of which everything in this universe is made of. So that is the theory of everything which we are going for. And so that is the theory of everything which we are going for. And Vedanta has taken the same kind of approach, and it has given a name to it, and that is what is called as Sat, or the Brahman, which we saw in the previous slide, right? So this ultimate substance, which out of which this entire universe is made of, that is what we call as Sat. Okay, so we give a name so that we can discuss about it. So now next we need to understand what is it like? What is Sat like, right? What would it be? Now if you look at physics, right, like if you in fact, like, we say physics, you may say, okay, why not chemistry, why not biology? More fundamental, right? Like if you take a piece of wood, for example, right, what is biology? Like, studying the biological properties of that wood is called biology. What is chemistry? Studying the chemical properties of that piece of wood is called chemistry. And what is physics? Studying the physical properties of that piece of wood is called chemistry. And what is physics? Studying the physical properties of that piece of wood is called physics. So that way, different sciences have a different domain of properties about the same substance. So at a much higher level, of course, like the piece of wood has dead cells, so you use biology to study that. Go for a still lower level, like where you have the ionic and covalent bonds and all that, like that is at the chemical level of studying that substance. If you go further deeper into it, then, and we are just choosing physics just because it's at a lower level and we want to go still at a lower level. Okay. So if you look at a piece of wood or a piece of plastic, you will say, okay, this is yellow in color and this is smooth to touch and it is shiny and all that. But then if you go still further, if you put it under a microscope, now the lattices, there is no concept of yellow there, right? The concept of color itself is only at a much higher level. And what appeared to be very smooth and shiny to the naked eyes, under a microscope it is very ragged. You see a lot of hard edges and all that. A more powerful microscope, under an electron microscope, for example, then you will find that 99% of that is empty space only, right? Between the nucleus and the electrons, there's all empty space. So at different levels, right, you see different things, and the properties are also different at the highermost level. Like you had properties, right, like color and then texture and those kind of things. And then as you go deeper, like what the properties matter that actually are defining properties there are, like molecular distance and lattice structure, and then the homogeneity. Still further, like when it go to the level of atoms, like charge and spin and, those kind of things come in. So basically, like, and if you go to the standard model, like you have the up quark and down quark and charm and, so you have different set of properties at that level, And so to measure the properties at every level, you have different instruments, right? Now, if you take a piece of wood and if you use a thermometer, you will measure the temperature of that wood. If you use a scale, you will measure the length, breadth, width and dimensions of that piece. And then if you use a chromometer, you will measure the color of that piece. So different instruments are used to measure the different properties, and the property that manifests out of properties and the property that manifests out of that object depends upon what instrument you are using to measure, right? And also at what level you are measuring. So this is what we see when we look at when you try to analyze the proper. Now at every level, right, the properties are emergent and they are superimpositions. So at one level, there is one set of properties which are valid, and also because of the instrument that we are using to measure, and you go to now those properties no longer hold any meaning there, right? And there are different set of properties, and to measure those properties you have to use a different set of instruments, and those instruments, so the capability of the instruments and the nature of the instrument and what the instrument measures, that defines what you measure, right? The nature of the instrument and what the instrument measures, that defines what you measure, right? Just like what we saw in the previous slide. So now let us do a thought experiment and assume at the final level, at the level of that substance, that fundamental substance out of which everything is made of, right? Now at that level, what would the situation be, right? Now to be able to measure the temperature of a piece of wood, my thermometer has to have this wood, and we have this property called temperature, and the temperature of the wood affects the thermometer, and then the thermometer gets affected and it shows a reading, right? That is how measurements are done, right? And that is what the problem happens when you go to subatomic levels, where the whatever substance you want to measure itself starts influencing the instrument, and that influencing the measurement you have taken, right? That is one of the biggest problems, right? Like if you have an ammeter, it should have zero internal resistance. An voltmeter should have infinite internal. If you have an ammeter, it should have zero internal resistance. An voltmeter should have infinite internal resistance. But in reality, like neither zero resistance is possible nor infinite resistance is possible. So whatever way you measure, like the voltage or current that you measure is always slightly different from the current which of the thing which you want to measure, because always the instrument to an extent affects what is being measured, and a good instrument is that which doesn't affect it too much, right? So, and this becomes a big problem when you go to the subatomic levels, where what you want to measure is so feeble. Design instruments which cannot affect the object that you want to measure. Now coming there, so basically at any point you should have an instrument and you should have the object that you want to measure, and then you can make the measurement. Now if you go to the final level, where everything is just one thing out of which everything is made of. Now at that level, the object and the instrument cannot exist separate from each other, because the object also is reduced to that ultimate substance, and the instrument, and both of them are the same thing. You cannot have any measurement, there cannot be any properties. So at that level of the ultimate substance out of which everything is made of, there is no properties, right? Now this is the arrives at. So that ultimate substance out of which this entire universe is made of, that cannot have properties. It is nirguna, right? Now this is a very, very significant, you can say, discovery, or you can say logical thought Vedanta arrived at thousands of years back, right? So whatever we are talking about, though I am putting it in the language of physics, which is recent, but then the ideas, these concepts, everything is there in the Upanishads. It is all there, like it's all thousands of years old, right? And which was formal, who was around 700 AD. That's what we are talking about. So this ultimate substance cannot have any properties, because there is no distinction between object and instrument. That boundary has vanished at that level, and so at that level there cannot be any measurements, there cannot be any properties, and so at that level there cannot be any measurements, there cannot be any properties, because all properties are superimpositions of the measuring instrument that is used. So the whole thing is connected and related, right? So now when you don't have any properties, that ultimate substance, right, the fun properties, that ultimate substance, right, the fundamental substance out of which this entire universe is made of, that doesn't have any properties, and because it doesn't have any properties, there cannot be any change there. It is nirvikara. So it is nirguna, and nirguna is nirvikara, right? It cannot change, because any change is change of properties. Again, you look at it, right? Look at physics. Like any change is always change of properties only. And change also applies to change in space and change in time. So that which doesn't change is eternal change, is eternal, omnipresent, right? And any distinction between one object and another object is also a change of properties only. So which means that which doesn't have any properties can only be one. There can be only one such properties, can only be one. There can be only one such substance. So this entire universe, when you go to that level of what is that ultimate substance out of which the entire universe is made of, that is nirguna, and there is only one such substance, and that is what is called as Sat or Brahman, what we saw in the previous slide, right? It's the same. So this is what the understanding of Sat that we can come to. Now after this, we inquire into the another idea which is called Chit, which is consciousness. Now here Shankaracharya, but then there are later scholars who say it is not Adi Shankaracharya but Swami Vidyaranya who composed it. But anyway, there is a book called Drigdishya Viveka which has a very beautiful way of presenting this consciousness. So I'll follow that thread, right? Quickly you'll be able to understand what this consciousness. So I'll follow that thread, right? Quickly you'll be able to understand what it is. So Drig means seer, Drishya means what is seen. So the discrimination between seer and seen, that is the analysis we are doing. Now our eyes look at various objects. So if you look at an object, okay, you say this is green, this is yellow, this is blue, this is red. Now, and then we use, so to do this judgment, to do this measurement of color, we extend our personality or our subjecthood up to the object, and then we are able to determine the property of the object. Now we also say, okay, I have got color blindness, I have myopia, I have cataract, I cannot see well, I have long sight, I have short sight. Now these are all properties of the eyes. Now to judge the properties of the eyes, we have to put back and then identify ourselves with the mind or intellect or whatever. Then we can judge the properties of the eyes. Now in this case, the eyes become the object and the rest of the system becomes the subject. So this is the subject-object relationship in measurements. When this is the case, now how do you define consciousness? Consciousness is the I. Okay. Now in this subject-object relationship, we see that the properties always belong to the object, right? So when we extend our subject, the object, and say green, yellow, blue and all those things, green, yellow, blue, they're all properties of the object. And then to judge the eyes, we have to make the eyes as an object, and then we can judge the properties of the eyes. Similarly, we can even make the mind as the object, and then I'm jealous, like all those things can be judged. So in any subject-object relationship, the properties always belong to the object. This is what we see, right? Now, the real I, when we say I am the subject. I am the ultimate subject. I can never be an object, because if you say I am something, that's already an object, that is not I. I is the ultimate subject. That is the pure consciousness. That is what is called as Chit. The I, which is the ultimate subject, which can never become an object, right? So this is the method of self-inquiry. Who am I? This one statement, right? I am the ultimate subject. That itself is the method of self-inquiry. Who am I? This one statement, right? I am the ultimate subject. That itself is a meditation. It's called Atma Vichara, where we try to find who am I? Who am I? Right? So this I am the ultimate subject, right? And I can never be an object, right? This is the real I. Now, which means the ultimate subject cannot have any properties, because all properties belong to the ultimate subject. I cannot have any properties. Now, the moment we say cannot have properties, nirguna, the same logic which we have seen before. Nirguna means nirvikara, it cannot change, and it is beyond space and time, and also there can be. So, I, the ultimate subject, cannot have properties. It is nirguna, and there can only be one nirguna, because anything from anything, any distinction is only because of properties. So that which is free from properties can only be one. So now we analyzed Sat. We found Sat was nirguna, and it can be only ekam, it can be only one. When we analyzed what is consciousness, Chit, that also we arrived at as nirguna, as only one, and so Sat equal to Chit. What we arrive at logically is mind-boggling. We say, so which means I am the substratum on which the universe is superimposed, right? So when we analyze Sat, we found that Brahman is the substratum. We gave a name to it called Brahman. That is the substratum on which the universe is superimposed. That is the ultimate substance out of this entire universe is made of. Now when we analyze who am I, the Chit, the consciousness, we find that I am the substratum on which this universe is superimposed. So that ultimate substance out of which this entire universe is made of is nothing but I, the consciousness. Now this is what is given in the Upanishads as Aham Brahma Asmi. Aham is consciousness, Brahma is the substratum of this universe, and I am the substratum of this universe, and I am the substratum of this universe. And this is what is meant by Jivaha Brahma Eva Na Aparaha, right? So here Jiva is, empirically we see it as an individual, but actually in reality it is I, the consciousness, and Brahma in reality it is I, the consciousness, and Brahma is the universe that I experience. The ultimate substratum of that universe is Brahma, and these two are not different, right? So Sat equal to Chit, and this is what is Aham Brahmasmi means. I am the substratum of this universe, and whatever we experience is a superimposition, and that ultimate substance of this universe, which the theory of everything is moving towards, right? That substratum is nothing but pure consciousness, which is I. His lectures, he brings in a lot of modern physicists like Chalmers and all these people, and then he explains that. So maybe you should look at a few of them, right? So, I, the pure consciousness, the observer, that alone exists in reality. That is, right? So, and what is the substratum for the superimposition? I am the substratum. I as consciousness. I am the substratum of this entire universe, and I am the witness of this whole drama, right? Like a movie or a dream, right? So I am pure consciousness, and on me everything is superimposed. And now, once we have understood this Advaitic vision, right? This is the truth, like it is just simple logic, right? And once we have arrived at this truth, now, though it is so difficult to understand, it is beautiful implications of the truth, right? Now, what are the implications? So, Aishi, can we take another 15 minutes? Is it okay, Mainak? Okay. Yeah. So that to understand this, this story I picked up from a lecture which Swami Sarvapriyananji gave when he visited IAC Bangalore, right? I didn't listen to him telling this story in much of other talks online, but he told this story when he was here. So a father and a son went to watch a movie, and the son had never seen a movie before. And on the way, the son asked the father, "Father, what is a movie?" So the father told him, "See, there will be a screen on." So the father told him, "See, there will be a screen. On the screen, they will be projecting images, and they'll projecting in a quick sequence, quick succession. They will project images. It will look as if they are moving, and there'll be synchronized sound. It will look very real, and you'll have a very real experience as if you are watching it really." And you'll have a very real experience as if you are watching it really. The son partly understood. He has never seen a movie before. And by the time they went there, the movie had already started. They were late. So they found their seat and sat, and then they started watching. And the son screen on which they are projecting the movie. I see the movie, or I see whatever the visual and audio experience, but I don't see the screen. Then the father said, "Your screen is in front of you." The son said, "Where? I don't see." Then the father asked the son, "Okay, tell me, what do you see?" The son said, "I see a lion." The son said, "Okay, I see a tree." "Okay, what do you see behind the tree?" The son said, "Okay, behind the tree there are some clouds." "No, behind the clouds?" The son said, "There is sky." Then the father asked, "What is behind the sky?" The son said, "What do you mean by behind the sky? How can you ask what is behind the sky?" So then the father said, okay, fine, no problem. Watch the movie. We'll talk later. And after a few minutes, there was interval. They switched off the movie, and the father and son went, had some popcorn, ice cream, nachos, tacos, whatever, and then came back and sat and started watching the movie again. And now the father asked the son, "So you are asking, where is the screen? Can you see the screen?" The son said, yeah, I can see the screen. It is in front of me. On the screen only everything is projected. I can see. So now the son doesn't have any doubt that I can see. So now the son doesn't have any doubt about the screen, even though the vision is exactly identical before the interval and after the interval. There is a cognitive difference. Not able to see the screen, or he was not able to discern the screen, discriminate and look at the screen when the movie is running. Now, but after the interval, the son is able to identify the screen even when the movie is running, just like before. Now, what happened in between? There was a moment and the son saw the screen without the movie. So, even a moment's experience of the screen without the movie gives a permanent knowledge of the screen that even after the movie starts, you have no problem identifying the screen separate from the movie. This is exactly what is needed here. So that's what we saw. I am that substratum. I, the pure consciousness, I am the substratum on which this entire experience of this universe is projected on. I, the pure consciousness, the ultimate subject, which can never become an object. I am pure consciousness, and this entire experience of this universe, of this life, everything is nothing but a superimposition on top of this. Now, movie, right, where there is volcanoes, there is earthquake, and there is flood, and there is storm, everything. And the storm in the movie does not blow away the screen. The flood in the movie does not wet the screen. The volcano in the movie does not burn the screen. Now, why? Because the movie cannot affect the screen, right? So same thing here, right? Gita has a beautiful shloka. I, the pure consciousness, the water cannot wet it, fire cannot burn it, wind cannot dry it, weapons cannot cut it. Very much like the screen, the pure consciousness. Now, my level of reality is higher than the reality of this world. So the world has absolutely no capability to affect me, the pure consciousness, right? Because I am real and this universe is mithya. I am real and this universe is mithya. It's a superimposition. Just like how the movie is projected on a screen, right? And nothing in this universe can affect me because I am the witness. Now, this is the practical implication of this knowledge, and practical implication of this knowledge, and knowing this is Jivan Mukti. I am free. I am free here and now, right? When I understand, identify, realize, own up this knowledge of myself as pure consciousness, as the ultimate subject, and when I deeply understand this without any doubt, and when I am convinced about this, right, when I have the right knowledge, it's as simple as any other knowledge, just that here it is a knowledge about me, right? So it is a simple knowledge, and getting this knowledge is what is called as enlightenment. And once you have this knowledge, and when this knowledge, your belief and your understanding and everything is rooted on this knowledge, now that is Jivan Mukti, right? So this is Advaita. This is the implication of Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jivaha Brahma Eva Na Aparaha, right? So now I think we can open up for a few questions if any of you have. So I hope I have been able to convey this knowledge, and the knowledge which I got from my teachers, and it's very, very logical, and if you look at it, it's simple, step by step, logic after logic, and the entire work of Shankaracharya, of various Bhashyakaras is basically raising various questions, challenging this entire system of knowledge, this logic at every step, and then clearing the doubts, and then showing that no, this is what it is, this is what it is. That is what has been a huge amount of literature is available on trying to, right, like raising various objections, questions, and then answering them. And this knowledge stands all the scrutiny for thousands of years, right? It has stood the scrutiny, and it is available to us even now, thanks to great stalwarts like Shankaracharya and Vivekananda and these people, right? So, any questions we can take up? All the spiritual practices, all the various schools of Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, everything is finally for this only. So there is nothing other than the effort or preparations to know this who am I. So everything, every aspect of Hinduism, every aspect of Vedanta is basically a pointer towards this only. There is nothing which is away from this. Okay. Now, either it would be a preparation of the mind for it. You might do japa, you might do social service, you might do bhakti, puja, everything, or you may do upasana, meditation. They're all preparing the mind so that you can ask this question, who am I? And whatever we discussed and it's as simple as this, right? Ramana Maharshi says, Atma Vidya Ati Sulabham, right? It is a simple, clear knowing of who am I. So, as I told you, like the one word, right? I am, just hold on to this, right? This is what is Ramana Maharishi's way. Ask who am I? When you say who am I, like what do you mean by I, right? I am the ultimate subject. So know yourself as the ultimate subject. Reject every idea of being an object. Go back to I as the subject. And when you discover your own subjecthood, when you understand, when you intuitively get the answer, right, to I as the ultimate subject, then you have the knowledge. When you understand, when you intuitively get the answer, right, to I as the ultimate subject, then you have the knowledge. Everything is pointing to that. No, it's not a waste, right? So it is just a matter of time. More you find out, like you will find something, and then from that you will find some technology. For example, like theory of relativity, right? That time dilates, right? So time dilates when at high speeds. Now that is very much needed for launching satellites and for your simple GPS to work. So you cannot say that the Einsteinian physics is of waste, right? Without that, you cannot have GPS, you cannot launch satellites, your rockets, nothing will work. You have to use those signs for that. So nothing is a waste, okay? But it is a matter of time where it will reach there. Just like how Einstein and other theoretical physicists did a lot of thought experiments, the Vedantic rishis, they have done a lot of thought experiments. And with those thought experiments, they have arrived at these truths, right? So, only thing is that probably the science, right? So, only thing is that probably the scientists have not been exposed to it in the right perspective or using the right vocabulary. So when they, if they arrive at it, if they see, like, of course, like even people like Schrodinger and they were all familiar with Upanishads, right, with Upanishadic thought. So basically, our Indian physicists, unfortunately, like many of our Indian physicists themselves are not familiar with Vedanta. So hopefully our Indian physicists who are familiar with Vedanta can take it up and the modern science ahead based on these ideas, and that will help the entire world. Om Ishwar